And I did the exact same thing as a pet owner. I made a lot of mistakes because I was reading a lot of misinformation online. The amount of protein within this diet, though, is ridiculous. Now, as a young dog, this might not be an issue, but as we get older, kidney disease is an age-related condition.
When we talk about natural and synthetic, what is your view on that?
I feel like synthetic feels like a bad word, but basically it's a highly purified form, and there's like a range of synthetics. Like you can get a chelated form of zinc that's highly bioavailable. I typically don't recommend any dehydrated bones or cooked bones. It works to keep the teeth clean until the teeth fracture. One thing you can do in order to help with stool consistency is
Welcome to the DAFY podcast, the place where you will get expert-led and science-backed advice on dog health and nutrition. No more confusion and no more conflicting opinions. Just clear guidance to help you make informed decisions for your pup. Because when it comes to our dogs, they deserve the very best care. And we, as dog parents, deserve confidence in the choices we make for them. Let's meet an expert. Nikki, welcome to the DAFY podcast. It's so great to have you on.
I'm so excited to be here.
So we have been talking for, I think, over a month now, and I'm so excited about our conversation today. But before we start, Nikki, can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and your background?
Sure. So I'm based in the United States. I've been a registered veterinary technician, which is very similar to a registered veterinary nurse in Europe. And I've been that for about a little over 10 years now. Prior to that, I worked actually in wildlife medicine for probably 7 years while I was in college. So my background is both in wildlife, mostly birds and small mammal, and then in exotics and going into dogs and cats. Basically while I was in, I guess, small animal practice, I ended up getting my own dogs. And then I feel like most dog owners, I started looking at, what food should I feed? And then I went down a rabbit hole because I had a dog with gastrointestinal issues. And then I also had a dog with allergies. So those are the most common, I feel like, conditions that a lot of people have issues with. And it kind of reached towards diet first. And I did the exact same thing as a pet owner. I made a lot of mistakes because I was reading a lot of misinformation online, and then eventually started doing a lot more education formally on it. And then we started getting a grasp on both of the dogs, what they needed. And I got into, because of that, homemade diets for my dog that had GI issues. And secondarily, I got onto combo feeding for my other dog that had allergies. So since that point, I guess now I've been formulating, I think, for exactly 10 years. No, my dogs are 12 and I started a year. I guess it'd be 11 years I've been doing formulating for dogs. And then I've been continuing on to education since then. So now I have so many certificates that I can't even keep track of them anymore. If I was going to name ones that I thought that were actually good, I'd say the dog science course by Linda Case. And then I'd say the diploma of companion animal nutrition, which is a six class course that's taught by Illinois University Carbondale that's online. Those two are really good. And then I'm in a master's program right now. So obviously I love nutrition. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I've been doing it for quite a while now.
Literally, it's like the longest list ever. But that's it, right? It's like such a big word, isn't it? That you're never too qualified, isn't it? Like you still all the time, you just need to get on top of the latest research.
New things come out on a regular basis, which is why I liked listening to continuing education. I feel like a lot of people, I would say that I'm a combo feeder, since I find kibble and fresh food both appealing for different reasons, and I'm in the middle of a lot of things. So a lot of people, I feel like, don't listen to a lot of pet food CE, but I actually find it really useful. And a lot of the up and coming research is done through there. And I can apply that to homemade diets a lot of the times, where we can do some really amazing things for these dogs with maybe a diet that might be more palatable for some dogs that maybe aren't eating as well or something like that. So I enjoy it, and I'm still always learning. And it's been fun. It's been a fun journey.
You can clearly see that you're very passionate about it, and it's amazing to see. And it's especially that you've done it for 10 years now. This is why I like to have people like you, because you have just a wealth of experience that you can share with people. And I think people will get so much value from it. So in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, this is going to be a bit of a different kind of like podcast to the usual ones I run. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what makes a complete and balanced diet for dogs, what are all the different components to it. But we are also going to do something that I absolutely love, which is we're going to do a little review of 4 different case studies. So we went off and got 4 different dogs, different breeds, different age, and asked the owners some questions related to their diet, their supplements, what they're happy with, what they're not happy with. Then you've done an amazing job at reviewing it, and we're going to share it with everybody today, because I think if there is someone else going through this similar issue with their dog, I think they will benefit a lot from hearing a real life story and some kind of real life feedback.
I find that I learn best from examples. So that's why I really wanted to do examples in the podcast.
Yes.
I find that a lot of things are so general online that a lot of the times it's hard to apply to your own pet or to get an idea of where your pet maybe sits. I also thought that if we used real cases, we could probably discuss some of the nuance of nutrition, because I feel like a lot of the times online, you'll see kind of these ideal situations presented. And oftentimes in real life, it is not ideal. So you have to you don't know where the exception is or where like the workaround is maybe for your particular dog. So you feel like you're scrambling in the dark. So that's why I wanted to use actual real cases rather than talking in more like ivory tower gold standards.
Yeah, and I think there are so many layers to it, isn't it, that dog owners like sometimes they don't even think of. And the reality is every dog is different. And this is why sometimes going case by case is actually the right thing to do. Yes, that's amazing. So first question is, can you give us a simple overview of what makes a complete and balanced diet for a dog?
Sure. When you're looking at pre-made diets, I feel like a lot of the work has actually been done for you, which is why it's so much easier in some ways. But there's also a lot of legality aspects of it that can make it complicated, like wording that's legally defined versus not and stuff like that. But basically, how they've established nutrient profiles is we have something called the National Research Council. Now, the National Research Council is like a worldwide thing where all these researchers came together and they combined a whole bunch of research papers on dogs and cats in this case. And they established basically what the nutrient needs of dogs are based off of hundreds and hundreds of research studies. So like they looked at vitamin B metabolism in dogs and established what the minimum, and that like we don't have enough data to establish a maximum, for example, with most B vitamins. So that's the NRC has this nutrient profile. And then what different organizations around the world have basically done is they've said, okay, that's like a minimum standard. Now, how can we make that into a generalized profile that can apply on a mass basis? So the NRC has 2 different profiles, one that's dose. So you actually put in like your dog's weight in kilograms, and then you use an equation and it gives you like the exact dose of zinc that your dog needs as a minimum value, a recommended value, and then potentially not for zinc, but for other nutrients, a maximum recommended value. And then what they did for AAFCO and FedAF is they said, okay, we have these specific profiles. How can we make this on a mass basis so that we can make a pet food that could go with the average dog? So with AAFCO, what they basically did is they looked at the caloric needs of the average dog, and they said, okay, the average dog that's 50 pounds consumes this many calories. So we're going to make sure that the dose of zinc is at this minimum level for the amount of average calories consumed. So it's based off of kind of the average. Now, FedAF is a little bit more specific in the sense that they have 2 nutrient profiles, one for slightly lower calorie feeding and one for average calorie feeding. So they have 2 different ones, and you'll see that the dosage per calorie is a little higher in the FedAF lower calorie. And that's because, so say I have a dog and it's consuming, 600 calories a day, and its dose it needs of zinc is 15 milligrams. Now, if it's consuming 600 calories a day, I need 15 milligrams of zinc per 600 calories. And that's going to be the dose it needs. But say the same dog is way more active, maybe they're just metabolically a little bit different, more lean muscle mass or something. And instead, to maintain a healthy weight, they need 1,200 calories a day to maintain a healthy weight. Now they need 15 milligrams of zinc still for their body weight, but they can get that in 1,200 calories. So that's the difference on a very general way of saying it, the difference between maybe a diet made for lower calorie feeding versus a diet made for maybe average or higher calorie feeding. So a pet food company and like FedAF can choose if they're going to make a diet for an average dog or for maybe a lower calorie dog. And then same with AAFCO, they can decide to make it for the average dog, or they can make a light diet, which basically is that lower calorie feeding diet. They have defined ranges that are lower than AAFCO. And you have to use the word light, L-I-G-H-T or L-I-T, in order to use that nutrient profile and define it as that. You could make it without using that term. However, it's not identified, so you'd have to ask to see if that food would be appropriate for lower calorie feeding or not. Now, generally speaking, no dog on the, or no pet food on the market that is made for the regular healthy dogs is going to be nutrient dense enough to be fed below what's called resting energy requirements. Now, technically, resting energy requirements is like the minimum that we describe as caloric requirements for dogs. But if your dog has a really slow metabolism, say they have hypothyroidism, they have Cushing's, or say they just are prone to weight gain, or you have an older dog with really bad arthritis, or you have a dog that's going through rehab, they may actually be consuming calories at or below resting energy requirements quite normally. If you do have a dog for that, then you actually have to look at like prescription pet foods that are made to be even more nutrient dense than the over-the-counter version. So that's generally speaking how it works for pre-made diets.
I actually, one quick question on that. I was doing some research about what people ask. One of the question is, what should I know about how energy, calories, ties into nutrient density? So what is the difference between the two? Because I think that's where people get confused, and that's what people don't really get when we talk about in general energy, and when we talk about, oh, but it needs to be nutrient dense. What does that mean, and how can we explain it to a dog owner in a really simple way?
So nutrient dense basically means that there's more grams of the nutrients, so say zinc, per calorie fed. So like I said, so having 15 milligrams of zinc per 600 calories is more nutrient dense than 15 calories of zinc per 1,200 calories. So if you have a dog that needs lower amounts of calories, you need a more nutrient dense diet. So that diet that is 15 per 600. Now, these are just made up numbers. It's not exact. It depends on how many calories your dog is consuming and their weight and all that kind of stuff. I was just making an example there. So don't just assume you're dog eats 50 milligrams of zinc per 600 calories. Won't make sense for a 15-pound dog.
Yeah.
Not at all. But it depends on, and nutrient density is how you choose which diet may be most appropriate for your dog and what ones maybe are definitely not appropriate. If you automatically know your dog requires lower amounts of calories in order to maintain a healthy weight, then you can automatically eliminate all the diets that are made for the average dog. Like all those are gone. Now you only can go with these diets, right? Like it automatically basically takes away an entire category.
Yeah.
And the same thing if you know your dog is highly active, it takes away all the ones made for lower calorie feeding. Now I will say most diets are made for the average dog. There are not that many that are made for low calorie feeding on the market. There just aren't. I only know a handful. I honestly, in the US, I had one brand that could go below resting energy requirements. So it was a pre-made fresh food, and they went off the market recently. So they aren't even there anymore. So now I'm stuck with, if they want to do homemade, they're going to have to do homemade if they want to do fresh food.
So I was going to ask, what's the implication of not having these diets available on the market? Because obviously, like you said, if a dog is overweight and they need to lose weight, what options can they have?
You're going to be stuck with homemade, basically. Or what I can do is use a diet that's almost complete. There's a couple of brands, and I'm not going to name brands, but there's a couple of brands in the US that are almost okay for like significant restriction. And I can add in those nutrients to make them balanced. So if I have a full typical analysis available of a diet, which a typical analysis, so the guaranteed analysis is what on the pet food label. It says like percent crude protein, percent crude fat. Hopefully it gives you like percent ash and percent moisture, maybe gives you percent fiber and, that maybe calcium, phosphorus, omega-3s, like it depends on how much they want to put on there. But hopefully you'll at least have the 5 values: protein, fat, ash, moisture, and fiber. Hopefully you'll have those 5 at the very least. But that's a guaranteed analysis. A typical analysis can be on an as-fed dry matter, or a nutrient density grams per 100 or 1,000 kcals. And this goes through every amino acid. It goes through all the essential amino acids, the protein, the essential fatty acids, total fat. It'll go through all the vitamins and the minerals that are essential as well. And they have it all on there. And then what I can do is take those numbers, put in an Excel spreadsheet, calculate out the NRC needs for your dog, and then compare it over of, okay, we need to add in like a B complex and some selenium. And we can add those onto that diet. Does that make sense? So like I can finagle a diet that's not exact to make it so that it'll still meet needs, even if it's a little low in some areas. So I've had to do that quite a bit. And not all fresh food brands give you the full typical analysis. So that's where
I was going to ask, what do you do in that case when that happens?
So that case, it's going to be like an owner decision. So we can go with this diet and say, okay, it's short term, like maybe it's only a little bit of weight loss that's required. And because it's only a little bit of weight loss required, we'll go with a non-ideal diet for just a couple months, maybe add on like a general, like pet multivitamin that you can put on top of any diet that has like B vitamins and like selenium and zinc, because usually those are the most common things other than limiting amino acids that are there. And then just say, this is only short term, like 3 months max. You only need a pound or two. Like, we're just going to do the short term. The other like non-ideal situation is, okay, maybe we don't do fresh food for this. Maybe we think short term of it's going to take a year. We're going to transition to kibble for a year to a diet that is appropriately balanced for that period of time. Then we're going to go on that. And then we're going to see if we can get back up to the average calorie amount for this diet to be balanced that we don't know is balanced or not. So basically, if we don't know that, we either take a risk of it could be unbalanced, but maybe we'll do it for a short period of time. Or maybe we go into the diet that you guys don't love, but is appropriate nutrient dense. And we say, okay, we're going to try to do this for a year, get the weight down with severe caloric restriction. Then we're going to try to transition back to average amounts of calories on this other diet that we know at average amounts of calories is balanced and see if we maintain there. But some dogs won't. Some dogs metabolically need lower amount of calories in order to maintain their weight. And if that's the case for your dog, then it's one of those things like, do you want to home make a diet? We can make one that's homemade. Do we want to just do the kibble or a canned food? And kind of discuss those options and choose between them. But it might be something where you have to consider diet change or something new.
Yeah. And why do you think companies are so reluctant to share the full nutritional breakdown, a typical analysis that you mentioned?
I think they're worried because they formulated the diet. They probably paid a lot for that formulation. They don't want other people copying their formulations. So it might be that. It might be just the cost that they put into developing this food, and they don't want someone else to be able to steal that information, which I can understand the basics of that. As a nutritionist, that's not really what I'm looking to do. And I don't work for a big pet food company. So I'm not going to be I don't formulate commercial diets. It's not something I enjoy doing. Some people love doing that, but it's not something I like doing. I like doing personalized nutrition instead. So I think it's because they're worried someone's going to steal it. That's the only thing that I can really think of. Either I would hate to think that the reason why the company is not providing that information is because they don't have it. That's possible. It's very expensive to run a typical analysis. So a small pet food brand, especially when they're starting out, they may not run a full typical analysis because of the cost. When they're starting, they might just run a guaranteed analysis to see if their macros are on point and assume that if the macros are on point, then everything else is on point.
Which is scary, isn't it? Because it's when you have a dog that is ill and might need additional support. Let's say, I don't know, I think of Rusty because I just know his breed really well. Heart problem, too much sodium is not that great for them, as far as I know. Then you're like, oh, if I can't have that information, and how do I know that the food is actually not contributing to his heart issues and things like that?
Yeah. So that is the risk, is that if we don't have a full typical analysis, if we haven't done digestibility studies, we don't know, there's missing pieces, right, in the formulation. I will say, when we're thinking about a homemade diet, am I running a typical analysis on the homemade diet I formulate for you? No, I'm not. It's too expensive for one person to do that. We try to compensate, which is what I think some pet food companies do too. They over supplement a bit to make sure that we're most likely meeting needs, even with small amounts of variation. I'm also when you home cook for your dog, you're not sending it out to a lab for a parasite pathogen testing. All this stuff, for a homemade diet, it's not there. So there is that. you have to put trust in the company that they are doing their best to formulate. Just if you worked with someone one-on-one, they're doing their best to formulate. But I also think that with a commercial recipe, they're not thinking about your specific dog, versus with a one-on-one, we would be talking about your specific dog. So I think there's some benefits to a homemade that has no quality control or testing versus a general one that has no quality control or testing. But at the same time, like, there's benefits to both, I think.
Yes, yes. No, makes sense. You mentioned about like adding things that are missing. So they formulate it, and then if something is missing, it's normally added through natural or synthetic. Right? When we talk about natural and synthetic, what is your view on that? Because lots of people are very reluctant when they hear the word synthetic as opposed to natural supplements or whatever it is, nutrients in general. What is your view on that?
So it depends on what you need and how much you need of it. Often, like, you have to think like a natural food is not usually just like one thing in it, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff, right, in a food. And because there's so many things in that food, sometimes the density of the nutrient you need is not high enough in order to meet needs, or in order to meet needs, it makes it so other things have to go down. So for example, like, I think I did a calculation on needing omega-3s and using sardines to get it for joint disease. And like, you'd have to just feed sardines, but you would be so deficient in everything else that like, you're going to have to supplement 13 more things in order to meet your fish oil. Like, it doesn't make sense. So in many cases, if we want to optimize for maybe certain profiles on the macronutrient statement or hitting certain key nutritional like factors, we will aim for maybe a synthetic. Now, I feel like synthetic feels like a bad word, but basically it's a highly purified form. And there's like a range of synthetics. Like, you can get a chelated form of zinc that's highly bioavailable that would work great for a dog. And that's what we use for, if dogs, say a husky has like a genetic mutation making it so that they end up with zinc deficiency, even though there's plenty of zinc in the diet, we add on a chelated zinc for that dog to meet needs. And that's how their skin resolves, is using chelated zinc. So these are highly bioavailable forms of these minerals. And for the less bioavailable forms, usually those are like oxides. They're less expensive. So if you're making a food that maybe is more like of an economy food, I could see using those, and it would make sense to use those. It really depends on the diet, but I think synthetics get a bad rep, where like with natural foods, a lot of the times you can't meet a lot of the nutrient like needs that you want. And they'll contain other things, like flaxseed has like anti-nutrient factors that you're going to need to factor in when you're formulating. So then you're going to have to supplement on the other end in order to deal with the natural item that you're adding in order to get other things met. And then it might not be very bioavailable because it's bound to other things in its natural form. So you're not even, though on paper it may look like you're meeting needs, but in actuality, you're at 50% of needs because 50% of that is bound and not able to be actually utilized. So I typically, when I'm formulating diets, I will go with a synthetic, like a chelated, a highly bioavailable one, but I will go with a synthetic. Now, like I said, you can, especially for cost reasons, you could go with less bioavailable forms and just add more. That's fine too. As long as you're meeting needs, though, the dogs should still be healthy on the other end.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense.
One thing I forgot to mention too is allergies, right? Like, sometimes you are limited by allergies in order to supply synthetic versus natural sources too. So though a natural may work, a synthetic may be better. And this actually might be like different types of synthetics. Some dogs may react to certain types more. So the chelated ones, how you chelate something is attaching it to amino acid. So say your dog actually has an allergy to the amino acid chelate that's attached to your mineral. One of the less bioavailable versions actually might work better for that dog because they're allergic to the amino acid chelate. So allergies can play a role too. And though it's pretty unlikely to have an allergy to something like that because it's in such a small amount too, but it could happen theoretically.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Do you find that people need to be aware of specific micronutrients or bear in mind or ask about when they are searching for a diet for their dog? Or
I feel like that probably would overcomplicate it too much to look at specific amounts of certain ones. I would more just make sure that they're generally met and that the food is like appropriately nutrient dense for the amount of calories consumed. So like the first thing I usually do with all of my clients is I first calculate out calories consumed and then I put it into brackets. So there's a resting energy requirements is like the very low. So if you're below that, you need a prescription diet. Then if you're between RER times 1.4 to probably RER times 1.2. That's like the light category or the lower calorie feeding category. And then around RER times 1.6, this is the average food. So I calculate out calories consumed and then put it into one of those brackets to figure out what nutrient density that dog needs. So if they're above RER times 1.6 or above, then I'm like, okay, all the average diets are going to work out well. But like when they start to get below, then I'm like, okay, now we're falling into lower calorie feeding.
Okay.
So instead of looking at like specific nutrients, I would more put them into categories, especially if they have a healthy dog. If they don't have a healthy dog, say they do have a medical condition, that's where like you're going to have to look at the condition, then you have to look at the specific nutrients associated with that condition, and then it's more complicated.
Yeah. And that's why that's when you will approach dog nutritionist, right?
Yeah.
Now that makes sense. Let's move into the diets, the forms that we got filled in and the different scenarios. So we've got 4 scenarios, 4 different dogs. So I'm going to read out briefly each dog. So I'm not going to name the dog. I'm just going to name the breed, the age, and the different details. And then you can talk me through your feedback based on the information that you got.
Okay.
So first dog is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. He's 5 years old, 10 kilograms. His body condition is ideal. Now, in terms of health issues, he's got a grade 1 heart murmur. He's currently not on any medications for that. However, he takes CoQ10 supplements, 100 milligrams twice a day. And he also has a chronic gland issue. In terms of activity, he does moderate activity, so walks and play, but nothing too crazy. When we look at diet, he's currently on 300 grams of gently cooked meals from a company called Different Dog, and he has different recipes, so different proteins from that company. He's fed twice a day, 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. Occasionally, he has some raw meaty bones, so chicken neck, duck necks. He has treats during the walk and enrichment time. And then he has evening snacks, normally a couple of tablespoons of Greek yogurt. In terms of poop, it's firm in the morning, and then he does a few more after that, and they tend to get a bit softer. Anal glands needs expressing every 3 to 4 months, and despite trying different products like probiotics, pumpkin, adding additional fiber, nothing really ever worked since he was a puppy. So the only concern is mainly trying to resolve this anal gland issue long term. She's trying to manage the heart situation as much as possible before it gets any worse. But the anal glands is something that has never been fixed since he was a puppy.
So starting out, like I said, with all clients, I usually go and look at their main diet and then I calculate out the calories. Now, since we had so many different diets, what I did is I calculated out how many calories for each one, and then I did an average assuming like equal rotation between balanced diets. Now, when I did that, it was about 432 calories from our balanced diets. The amount of calories in like the pea-sized treats, probably pretty small. I assume that's most likely only 20 calories. If I assume each one maybe is 2 calories each, they might be even 1 calorie each. Non-fat Greek yogurt isn't a lot of calories. That might be maybe 15 or so. And then the 2 different raw bones are the raw chews, the necks are between 100 and 160 calories each. If they're fed twice a week, that's 41 calories a day. So right now, when I was doing the calories as far as composition, from balanced diets versus unbalanced diets, we were getting about 87% of calories from our balanced category and about 13% from unbalanced. What this basically tells me is that the diet is almost to the point where it'd probably be complete imbalance if fed the average diet as far as distribution. However, when I was looking into the diets themselves, it's a bit hard because there's no light terminology in the US. So I don't know if they're using the FedAF profile for lower calorie feeding or for average calorie feeding for this particular brand. So that's something that I would probably go back and be like, hey, this is something you probably want to investigate and see if these are actually designed for lower calorie feeding. If they are, that's great. But if they're not, then this brand may not be appropriate. If we want to stick with the brand, we'd probably need to do some type of supplementation. We'd have to look at the diets and then individually supplement if that's the case. So that was just something that was my first comment is I don't know if these diets are appropriate for low calorie feeding or not. And this does fit into the category of lower calorie feeding. So the amount of calories is below RER times 1.6. So we're sitting at, on average, about 500 calories. And then the RER times 1.6 was 630. So we're significantly below that, but we're not to the point where we'd need a prescription diet, which is below 400. Most commonly, if we do have deficiencies within a diet, usually it would be for B vitamins, so thiamine, riboflavin, B12, choline. Other areas is potentially vitamin D or vitamin E, sometimes selenium. And so I'm not sure, like I said, for this particular diet, if that's going to be an issue or not. Now, as far as activity level, I know we're like probably lightly to moderately active. This breed doesn't really get, I guess, to the point where we're doing trials. Typically, I haven't seen many Cavaliers doing like agility and stuff like that.
I call them couch potatoes.
Yeah, usually they're a suburban dog. Let's just put it that way. They're maybe getting a walk twice a day, but they're usually not doing competitive trials.
No.
So the diets, when I analyze them based off of the composition, all of these diets are high in protein, extremely high in fat, and then like low to restricted in carbohydrates. Now, if I compare that to our needs as far as our activity level, it doesn't quite match. I can understand some people do want a lower carb diet just because maybe their dog doesn't do well on moderate amounts of fiber, or maybe they've listened to a lot of marketing where they're really nervous about carbohydrates, and I can understand that. But as far as the issue with using a diet that has really high amounts of fat, is that fat is the most nutrient dense of our macronutrients. It has twice the amount of calories per gram than protein and carbs do. So they lend themselves to a more nutrient dense diet. Now, this is a high moisture diet, so nutrient density is probably on the lower side, but they also lend themselves to not being typically super high in fiber. These ones tend to be, at least in insoluble fiber, pretty moderate on some of them. Some of them are low. Depends on the recipe. It's all around the board. Some of these are crude fiber at 2%. Some of them are almost 10% crude fiber, which is quite the spread as far as fiber content. But I think the important part to realize is that there's crude fiber, which is the only thing that I can really look at here, is insoluble fiber. And then there's another type of fiber called soluble fiber, and that is not expressed on a guaranteed analysis. So really, we only have half the fiber picture, not the whole fiber picture. So I don't know. These could still be relatively low in fiber, especially since they're a really low carb diet. It's possible that we're not actually getting a ton of fiber within the diet.
Which is possibly contributing to the gland issue.
Which it could be. The thing that we have is the looser stool at the end, which can be normal for a highly active dog, but for a less active dog, that's not typical unless it's happening on the walk itself. You'll start a walk, you get one, and then on the same walk, like they go down a couple houses and there's another one, and then
that's
down a couple
literally what's happened.
Yeah,
so that's,
so some dogs,
and our disclaimer is my dog, Cavalier King Charles, everyone's seen Rusty, but yes, it's probably three poos. First being really good, second one being really good, third one is like quite runny basically. And I'm like, okay, that surely is not going to help his anal glands, right? Every single day. But it doesn't do any harm. So after we come back from the walk until it's evening walk, there are no poos from him basically.
So it could just be the fact that it's just a walk. And so how movement works is movement actually will speed up the passage of stools through the GI tract. So if you do have a diet that's really high in insoluble fiber, that also speeds up the passage of stools through the GI tract. So typically, like when we're looking for diets for, say, like a working breed dog, we actually want them pretty low in insoluble fiber, and then they can have moderate amounts or equal parts of soluble fiber. Soluble fiber slows things down. So you might just have the wrong mix of fibers in order to make a stool that's more firm. But we will see in working dogs quite commonly that if they are going multiple times in the same walk or working period, that they do become looser over time. So this could be a normal thing, but it could also be an abnormal thing. One thing that you can do in order to help with stool consistency is a probiotic. It depends on the dog. Some of them, they'll do well on a probiotic by itself. Some of them will do better on a symbiotic, which has psyllium husk in it, which will have a higher amount of soluble fiber, which helps with fermentation of it'll slow down the passage of stools, then it'll help the good bacteria basically replicate within the GI tract. So you don't end up with a really big bulky stool with adding insoluble fiber. It's more of you're helping with the microbiome and its stability. to something.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. I didn't know that actually. So that's really interesting to know.
Yeah. So as far as usually brand recommendations, I like ProBiable DC. It's generally well tolerated and it's more of a mild like probiotic. It's not like a heavy hitter. There are heavy hitters like this biome where they're like really concentrated probiotics. And there's Animal Biome is another one where you send in like a stool sample and then they send you back like a little and it tells you like which strains they would recommend for your dog, which is very fancy. But I found with the Animal Biome and the Vis Biome, sometimes they're so strong that some dogs don't actually tolerate them. So if it's just a little thing, I usually go with something more mild, like ProBiable, has a little bit of inulin in it, which is a soluble fiber source. So it can sometimes help with kind of regulation of stools. But there are other brands, obviously.
Yeah.
Around, I usually just look for ones that have some type of clinical trial. So ProBiable has a couple clinical trials.
Yes.
That have shown that it's effective.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right. And then as far the other things that I wanted to comment about as far as optimizing here is that I think Rusty isn't what I consider a senior dog yet. Like we're not old, but we're starting to get to the point where we're going to be in the next 5 years transitioning to be a senior dog. So typically in this period, if I can find people at this time, I say, okay, we're going to look at your diet. The diets that you are using generally, except for one of them, they're all puppy diets. So they're all designed for growth, or they'll say they're all life stage diets. That means they're designed for puppies. And what this means is they have a much higher mineral content in order to support bone growth. Now, obviously your 5-year-old dog doesn't like need bone growth at this point, right? Their size they're going to be. So that extra mineral content has to be filtered out and processed by the body. So the kidneys, the liver, all those extra minerals have to be metabolized and then excreted, which can put an undue burden on those organs. Now, I don't think we have any research saying that like feeding a high phosphorus diet causes kidney disease, but kidney disease is from aging, like chronic kidney disease, other than if you have your dog ingest poison, right? That's acute kidney disease. But chronic kidney disease is an age-related condition that happens over time. So as your dog becomes a senior, it may be something where we want to look at more of an adult maintenance diet that is more on the lower end of phosphorus and calcium, so that we're not giving it so much that a lot of it has to be processed within those kidneys. It's having, you just don't want more things, I guess, to move in than is technically needed to.
Yeah.
If you can handle. So they do have from this brand, they had a low phosphorus, low purine diet, which I found very interesting. And this diet, they said that is not balanced for puppies, and that's true. And it has phosphorus that is on the lower end that's described. Now, I don't know the comparison to the other diets because phosphorus content wasn't described in the guaranteed analysis of the other diets in order to compare them. Like, I don't know. But I do know that the minimum is around, like, depending on you're looking at FedAF or AAFCO, 1 to 1.2 grams for phosphorus. And this is at 1.5 grams per 1,000 kcal. So it's near kind of that minimum value, which is what I like to look for in a senior dog diet. So it may be more appropriate. The amount of protein within this diet, though, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Usually when, again, for most dogs, if you do a really high protein content like this, basically what happens metabolically is that protein, you only need so much protein, right? So extra protein has to be broken down because it can't be stored. So it has to go through metabolic processes and then be turned into glucose, which can be used for energy or stored as triglycerides. And then the rest is excreted. And this is why if you have a dog on a really high protein diet, sometimes you'll see blood urea nitrogen increase and you'll see protein in their urine because a lot of that extra protein is basically having to be metabolized by the body. Now, as a young dog, this might not be an issue, but as we get older, kidney disease is an age-related condition, we may want to start bringing that protein content down. And usually I go below 100 for dogs is what my base recommendation is. For it depends on nutrient density. For dogs that are more active, we might go to like pretty low, like 60, 65, because they're going to consume so many calories per 1,000 kcals. For a dog that needs a more nutrient dense diet, we might go like 80, 85, 90, just because they're going to need more protein per calorie in order to maintain lean muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
That's an aside of the different things, but we may want to look at an adult maintenance diet, but like you have time, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. But the point you've made about the phosphorus is such an important point because, like you said, that's one thing that really stuck with me. We were chatting via email the other day, and I was like, but it is 1.5 phosphorus, that's not too bad. That is on the lower side in my head. And then you mentioned for a dog that doesn't have chronic kidney disease is fine, or a stage 1 chronic kidney disease is fine. But then if a dog does have already kidney disease and it's an advanced stage, actually that would be too high. And who's normally looking for a low phosphorus diet is maybe owners that have gone to the vet, they have got a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease, and actually they really do need that dog to be in lower side, really lower side. And I think if you don't know and you just read this is good, you will go and purchase it, when actually in reality it might not be necessarily the right thing to do.
Yeah, so this diet the title is like low phosphorus, low purine. But if your dog had kidney disease past stage 1, this is probably not appropriate. There's even some debate on stage 1 because of the protein content within this recipe. Like it's 124 grams of protein per 1,000 kcals. That is a lot of protein. Like it's well above what most dogs need, which means that a lot of that's going to have to be filtered out by the kidneys. And if the kidneys are impacted, this is one of the situations of if I had a dog already on this diet and they were just diagnosed with stage 1 kidney disease, I could probably put them on an adult maintenance of a different diet that's still balanced to AAFCO, and the dog would see improvement on their blood values just because the protein content is like twice as much as what the dog needs.
Yeah.
So this diet is probably a bit excessive in protein content for even stage 1, at least in my opinion, unless the dog has been on a diet even higher in protein and higher in phosphorus in the past, which some raw diets are. I don't find that most of them are higher in protein than this would be, but it is what it is. But it's not a clinically low phosphorus diet that would be appropriate for kidney disease past stage 1, definitely. And stage 1 would be debatable, depending on what the previous diet was. Okay. I'm trying to think what other things. Heart disease? Do you want to get into heart disease?
You know what? Just very quickly, as a quick question, because I'm also conscious of your time. The only question about the heart thing is, in your experience, am I doing the right thing? Is there anything else I should be doing differently to try? Because my outcome here is just, how can I delay this heart problem to become worse as he ages, as he gets older? And obviously, COQ10, that's all me researching, by the way. That was not a kind of suggested by anyone. I just took it to his cardiologist. I said, I'm going to do this because there is some research that backs it up. Would you do anything else differently based on your knowledge?
So based on my knowledge of heart disease, there's a lot you can do. Like they had, unless it's talking about like recent CE. So Purina Pro Plan recently came out with a diet called Cardio Care, which honestly, the research behind it is so cool. If someone has time to go and actually look at the research papers that are associated with that diet, it's a really cool diet. But basically they used a combination of like medium chain triglycerides and fish oil as the medium chain triglycerides as an alternative energy form for the heart. And then they basically modified the mineral content to help with metabolism of common medications for heart disease. And then they upped specific limiting amino acids that help with heart health. They upped those in order to make it so that the heart function improved. And it's super cool. Like honestly, as far as a diet and modifying for heart disease previously, I feel like only thing they did was pay attention to sodium content, which I feel like is like stage 1, like of things that you can do. This was much more like in depth of looking at drug interactions and fatty acid metabolism and eliminating it. It was so cool. Anyways. So we have new research on heart disease and things that you can do. As far as an early stage of heart disease, sometimes you don't have to go if you don't want to go that far, because you'd have to feed that Cardio Care diet, or you'd have to make a homemade diet that's custom. And if homemade is not within your realm, then that's probably not going to be something that you can do. It takes a lot to do a homemade diet. Then what I would say is I want you to make sure that the nutrient density is like on point. That's like my number one thing, because if there's not enough of like methionine, cysteine in all of these diets, it's a limiting amino acid and it happens to metabolize into taurine. And if there's not enough taurine, then that's going to impact the heart health, right? And same with some of the B vitamins. If you're low in certain B vitamins, then it's going to impact protein metabolism, which is going to impact heart health. So making sure that we have appropriate nutrient density is going to be like my number one thing. All of these fresh food diets, for the most part, are pretty low in sodium, usually. At least that's in my experience. They tend to be. Obviously, you could double check that. So a typical analysis and being able to look at it and make sure would probably be a really good idea as far as things to do. That would be my number one thing.
That's a good point, isn't it? Because as an owner, you don't think about it. You're like, unconsciously, you're feeding a diet that you think is the best diet you could possibly give him. But then actually, if you don't look at that nutrient density. And if you don't look at really digging into that company and asking questions and things like that, really make sure you feel confident you're giving them exactly what they need from a micronutrient perspective as opposed to macro. It's so true, isn't it? So that's a really valid point. And I think that's a really good feedback. And I think not many people do that, and like naturally, because you just trust the company to provide that in the food in the first place. Yeah. That's amazing.
So that was the main thing with heart disease. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to touch on was chews. So the poultry necks, there's a couple of different studies that have come out that say they have a pretty high pathogen concern. Some of the bacteria are pretty nasty. They can cause like neurological side effects and seizures and paralysis. So typically when I have people that are feeding like bones and stuff like that, especially necks, and even if they are like cooked, if they're cooked, then obviously the bones could shatter and there's an issue with like obstruction there. But if they are raw, then I would suggest reading some of the studies on some of the incidences of those pathogens so that you can understand what the clinical signs are, what the potential risk is. Obviously, any natural chew is going to have some pathogen risk. If you use a bully stick, they're more commonly going to be contaminated with like E. coli than something like a whimsy that's like a manufactured chew. That's totally true. But as far as type of pathogen, they don't have this particular strain of bacteria that causes like paralysis and neurological signs. It's going to maybe cause some GI signs. So I feel like the risk there for the necks is much, much higher than using other natural hide-based chews or bully sticks. Both of them have an obstruction risk potentially, but like the other one, the pathogen concern, I feel like is less severe. So just something, I guess, to consider like going forward.
Yeah. Would dehydrated chicken neck be better as opposed to just fed them raw?
And so bird bones, how they're designed is they're less dense than like a beef bone.
Yeah.
Which means that when they've been cooked, there's itty bitty holes in them and then they shatter and make really like sharp points and stuff like that. So I typically don't recommend any dehydrated bones. Or cooked bones just because of that. I think like different vets in different RVTs have had different experiences, but I had some unfortunate experiences where I remember there was a dog and it had eaten some basically dehydrated bones. It was a large dog too, so I don't know if it just had a lot or if it had a lot all the time and it just built up, but they got stuck in the passage of the hips. So you know the hole for the stool to pass? They got stuck there and we tried to flush it one way or grab it the other way, but they couldn't. We ended up referring it to a specialist and they had to break its hips to get because it was jammed in there so hard. They actually had to do like to break it in order to get it out. And I've seen other ones where like they have to do, it's just.
Yeah, it's really sad. I think it's like
so
people don't see this stuff every day when they purchase these things. And it's like actually when you come from a clinical side of things and you've seen it firsthand, that's why you're like, I don't want that to happen to another dog. And I will raise as much awareness as I can.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable recommending bones. I don't typically recommend them. I typically go with like soft tissue ones just because I would say all of them are choking hazards. If your dog gulps on any of them, they're all choking hazards. Like none of them are not choking hazards. That's why every single chew says you should be monitoring. Like every chew, even a whimsy, even a greenie, all of them says monitor your dog. Because if your dog tries to swallow it whole, it's a choking hazard.
Yeah.
All of them are choking hazards, but some of them have additional risks to that versus other ones.
Yes.
So bones, I know that they say like in the stomach, the bones start to break down, but like they don't break down that much. I've seen so many bones on x-rays. It's not even funny.
No.
Like it's not.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I know it like depends on the type of chewer your dog is, right? Because it's like very easily, it can happen in seconds that they're chewing. If they're an aggressive chewer, it can go the wrong way so quickly.
I think that, like I said, all of them have choking risks, like any chew does. And I feel like some people will dismiss that. It's no, the reason why they always ask you to monitor is because they're all potentially choking risks. But I think that I was in a CE with a boarded dentist once. And he said that he's like with chews, I feel like there's a point where this chew is really effective at like keeping teeth clean, but it's super risky. There's like a risk factor to all of these. Some of them are like it works to keep the teeth clean until the teeth fracture. So they're really hard ones. Works to keep the teeth clean until they choke on it. It works to keep the teeth. He's all chews. I feel like there's a risk factor. And it's about balancing the risk with cleaning and understand that chews aren't meant to keep the teeth clean anyways, like in the sense of they're an enrichment item. They're not really, yes, we use them as a dental support, but like depending on your dog and how they chew, it'll keep one side clean and the other side's going to
Yes.
be gross.
Yeah, exactly. So let's move on to a second dog. What we have as a second dog is a Cocker Spaniel. So she's 6 years old, 11.4 kilograms. Body condition is ideal. She's very high and super energetic. In terms of health issues, she has a sensitive stomach, occasional colitis, and sometimes that can result in nighttime diarrhea. Diet-wise, she's fed 300 grams of Skinner's chicken and rice, which is a working dog formula kibble. She's fed twice a day, and she gets regular human food extras such as raw carrots, broccoli, blueberries, and bits of fish skin or chicken. She's currently not taking any supplements. Her poop is mostly firm, but occasionally flares up with very runny poop. And the owner's concerns are they don't know whether if this diet is balanced. They want to know how to support gut health without triggering her sensitive stomach. She feels confused, or he feels confused about conflicting advice online, and also struggles to balance nutrition with her sensitive digestion. So what would your suggestion be here?
So I thought that this, honestly, this is something that I've talked about a lot online about working dogs and their kind of nutrient needs. And we talked about it, I think, a little bit earlier, where when you have a working dog, typically what you want is like a moderate to high protein diet, high fat, and then lower amounts of carbohydrates, because fat is your most calorically dense nutrient. And that's how you're going to maintain a healthy weight. Now, when I calculated out like calories that Rosie is currently eating and compared that to like those categories, right? Like below RER, then RER times 1.4, RER times 1.6. She is eating calories to maintain a healthy weight way above RER times 1.6. So this is what I consider, as far as activity level, this is a highly active dog. This is definitely a working dog. The complication with the working dog that has a sensitive stomach, I know they said that like we're basically controlled with like occasional flares on the current diet. Now, the current diet for a working dog diet is actually abnormal. Most working dog diets, like I said, are going to be moderate, then high, then more low. This working dog diet in particular is actually moderate and then low in fat and actually pretty high in carbohydrates. Now, when you have a dog that is a working dog, but you need to basically satisfy caloric needs, but you can't use fat, the next best nutrients to do that is going to be carbohydrates. So the higher amounts of carbs in this diet in comparison to fat is actually a good thing for a dog with a sensitive stomach. I actually had a dog with kind of the same issue where they needed a lot of calories to maintain their weight, but they couldn't handle a higher amount of fat. So this composition of the current diet that we're feeding is actually right on point for a dog that has maybe sensitivity to fat that still needs a good amount of calories in order to maintain a healthy weight. There's also plenty of protein within this diet. Like when I was calculating it out, we're well above twice the NRC minimums as far as protein. So I'm not concerned with the amount of protein that's being supplied in this diet. I don't have a full typical analysis, so there's no way to really make like in-depth calculations here. But because this diet is said to be complete and balanced as far as the label, it's most likely complete and balanced either to AAFCO or FedAF. And that means that it's going to supply all the vitamins and minerals and stuff as far as balance that Rosie needs. And Rosie also has basically plenty of extra category here, as far as usually we want 90% of calories coming from our balanced diet, only 10% coming from treats, chews, supplements, additions. By the description that we're getting, I would say that Rosie is probably less than 10%. Fruits and vegetables tend to be lower in calories. Some fish skin every once in a while. Yeah. It is higher in calories, it is higher in fat, but it's probably, if it's occasionally, it's not going to head us over 10%. What it might do though, is if you're adding on a lot of extra fat, that could potentially cause like flares to having a sensitive stomach. Now, one thing I actually didn't write down in my notes, but it popped into my head right now, is there's a couple of different reasons why you could have an occasional loose stools. The first thing I jumped on was like, okay, maybe we could have some gut dysbiosis. You could add on a probiotic and see if that helps. I feel like that's the low-lying fruit here. Say you still had occasional loose stools, even with the probiotic on board, that would be the point where you might want to go back to a vet and look at the other causes. So one, this diet is lower in fat, but it is not fat restrictive. So right now we're sitting at about 11% fat on a dry matter basis. Now for our fat restrictive diets, those are usually at about 6 to 7%. So you could go significantly less fat for a fat restrictive diet. You could also go, like, this diet is pretty low in insoluble fiber, which can help most dogs with their stools, but some dogs have something called fiber responsive diarrhea, in which case they need a really big amount of insoluble fiber, sometimes over 10% crude fiber within their diet in order to help. Obviously, we also have to think about like potentially some type of allergy situation. So going on like a novel protein diet or like a combination diet where it's one of all of those or two of those combined. So if the probiotics by themselves do not work, this is one of those situations where you might want to revisit with your vet and say, hey, I'm having this occasional issue. You could do additional testing. I know in the US, we have a GI lab at Texas A&M. I don't know if the UK where theirs is based,
Yeah,
but basically
maybe I heard of it.
okay. They run like a B6, a IBD screening, and then they also do parasite testing and stuff like that all together in one like stool test and blood test kind of situation. So if there's something similar in the UK, you guys could run that and see if anything pops up. They can also run like a PLI, which checks for like pancreatitis and things like, and see if that's maybe an occasional thing that's causing flares or something like that. That it doesn't sound like the loose stools are consistent. So hopefully just a probiotic by itself solves the issue. But if it doesn't, then that's something where, okay, we want to revisit with our vet and maybe go through a full diet history and decide which diet may be our next bet to go through next. But that's probably further down the line than what is immediate. The other thing is if the probiotic works as far as optimizing this diet, the thing that I would do is your diet has plenty of protein and it has probably sufficient fat, especially for fat sensitive, is I would look for treats instead of adding on like proteinous treats, especially if you don't need them for training, try to add on fruits and vegetables. So what a lot of kibbles don't have necessarily is going to be a variety of fruits and vegetables in them that are healthy and stuff like that. Some kibbles do, but some don't. So I would go ahead and add on, usually I tell people there's 5 categories that I like: dark leafy greens, edible mushrooms, cruciferous vegetables, berries, and I also have a color category, which is for etc. like pineapple and
I've seen a video
mango.
you did on Instagram on that, I think, a while
Yeah,
ago.
it might have been, they're like my general 5 categories, but what I basically do is you could put all that into a food processor with a little bit of like bone broth or something, create a
Yeah.
whole bunch of ice cubes, put it in, or 1 ounce or 2 ounce ice cubes, put them in your freezer, and then you can pop them out the day before or even use them as frozen enrichment. It really doesn't matter, but that'll add on some nice fiber and antioxidants to the diet.
It's
Again, super
genius.
easy and it's
Do
lower
it
in
all
calories.
at once, blend it up, do it all at once, and then you
You
get all the
can't
5 different categories.
So I'm lazy. So what I do is I buy equal bags from the frozen section. Like I buy frozen blueberries, frozen spinach,
Mm,
frozen mushrooms, frozen, and then I just weigh equal parts of each, throw them all in a food
yeah.
processor, and then basically create a puree with like broth. And then I throw that into, we have little soup molds here that are 1 ounce each or half a cup or fourth a cup each, depending on your dog's size. You can just put them in the molds and then you can just pop them out. So I freeze them and then I pop them out. And then usually I don't like feeding them frozen to my dog. So I put them in a little, like, I have a little container and it's glass. And just the night before, I pop out my ice cube into the container in my fridge and then it'll thaw by morning and I can just top it on top of the
Yeah.
food.
Yeah, that's
So like I'll
brilliant.
do 2 months of that at a time. So I
Yeah.
don't have to like do a lot together. But that would be my other thing
Love it.
is like although we don't have a lot of research saying adding fresh food to your dog's diet is going to extend their life, we have a couple smatterings of it. Most of the research we have is associated with fruits and vegetables. So that's why I usually say, hey, if you're going to add something and you have the space to add it, that might be something you want to look at.
Love it.
So
I like
yeah.
that. I think she's going to love that, or he's going to love that.
All right. I think. And oh yeah, and I didn't know what the life stage of this diet was. Or so the other thing on this diet was just further researching it more. So ask about quality control, formulation expertise, and then also I couldn't find an AAFCO statement on this diet. So Rosie, I think Rosie is 6. So again, not what I would consider a senior dog, but it's something where you're going to want to know if this is complete and balanced for a puppy or all life stages, or if it's an adult maintenance diet. And in the next 3 to 4 years, if it is an all life stage diet, you're going to want to know what your next step is into the senior years.
Yes.
So you might want to look at that next step diet, but that wasn't put online, so I couldn't figure that out.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's perfect. I think that's a good point. I'm going to do that. The same for that with Rusty, actually. You never think about that, do you? But actually, yeah, as soon as your dog hits senior, you have to start looking at that because their organs are just working a lot more and they're older. Yeah. Again,
They're just not
it's
going to
just
work
about,
as effectively as they used to.
yes.
Though I don't think I can't remember any research studies that says like feeding a high, like a puppy diet is going to cause kidney disease. It might be something to look to for the future.
Yeah.
Because theoretically, I feel like it could definitely affect it if it's like early stages or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. There is not much research on senior dogs, isn't it? Like nutrition. It's a lot more
There's a good amount. I think the problem is the research is usually based off of disease. So we do have some healthy dog research for senior dogs. Like we know that senior dogs have a higher protein requirement than adult dogs do. We know that their average caloric needs will decline by about 25% as they move into the senior years. Like we do have general research on it.
Yeah.
I have a course and a CE, race CE for vets on senior dogs that I've done with a senior dog vet, Dr. Monica.
Yeah. Nice. That's nice. Because I think it's a completely different care, isn't it? When they hit senior years. It's not like completely. There are so many more things you need to bear in mind, like regular blood tests, like different checks that you do, like arthritis, when they start limping, what are the signs? I have an interview with like a vet, like in a couple of weeks' time, and she's just a senior pet vet. That's all she does is that. And I think it's nice, isn't it? When someone, and it's like, why do you do it? She's, my dog is 16. And there is something about senior dog that just, when I look at them, it just kills you, doesn't it? Because they're not going to be with you forever. And just, you just
honestly, they're usually the funnest ones to work with. Like when I know that in clinic, everyone's, oh, the puppy, but usually puppies, when they come in, have horrible manners.
Yes.
They're so hyper. And like when you have the senior lab come in, the senior lab is so good. The senior golden, they are awesome. They come in, they wag their tails, they'll do whatever you want. My dog is 12 and I have twin boys, and they leave the door open so much. I wish they didn't, but like my door is constantly open. My senior dog sits on the rug at the front door. Whenever it's open, it just looks at me. He's like, they not again, my dear. And I'd be like, oh. I was like, why didn't you close the door? And they'd be like, oh, I forgot. And I'd be like, can you please go close the door? Because the dog's there. He's like, he won't come out. I was like, it's the idea. The idea.
Freaks me out. It's so true. Like with puppies.
And he comes out and gets hit by a car. I was like, I know it's never happened. And he's a really good dog. But like,
you just never know, do you?
Yeah, but like the 12-year-old dog, the 10-year-old dog with a little bit of arthritis that comes in loving you, but like
it just warms your heart. Is when they look at you in the eye.
It's like my favorite thing.
Yeah, they just look at you. I was at the vet today to get some blood tests for Rusty, and there was this old lab, black, with like white fur. You know when they start going white here, and he's just looked at me, and I just like I get teary straight away and I can't help it. I just want to give them a cuddle and just say, it's going to be okay. You're fine. You're very loved. And that's all you care about. It's so cute.
Exactly. So, the senior dogs are great. Like they're awesome because they've aged. And the age is what makes them, they're just more.
They're just mature. They're mature.
They're
and they're not
you
have an old parent
usually anymore.
Yeah, that you're caring for. You just look at them and you're just like, you taught me so much. You helped me so much. You've done so much for me in life. It's now my time to repay you. That's how I see it. It's like they've just been there for you. You're like amazing years of your life. And now it's your time to just give back to them. It's when they really do need you. And that's how I see it. And it's just a beautiful thing, I think. And it's powerful owning a dog.
Exactly.
Good. Should I read out the third one?
Sure. Which one are we doing?
So we are doing a Jack Russell Terrier next. It's 4 years old, 8 kilograms. His body condition is ideal. He's also very super energetic. Health-wise, he has allergies. So he has itchy skin, especially around the neck area. And he's currently on daily apple. His diet is Yora, I think that's how you pronounce it, insect-based grain-free kibble, 50 grams for breakfast, 50 grams for dinner. And they switched from raw due to the skin issues. The supplements he's on is JR chicken pate, used normally for training and walks. And then he eats toddler's food off the floor. Poop is moist but increased in volume since switching to insect kibble. Before was drier and less smelly on raw. The owner's concerns are finding the right diet for his allergies, wants good nutrition without making the skin issues worse, and also balancing cost and convenience, as Euro is not much cheaper than raw food.
Okay. So a lot of this, again, I'm based in the US. So some of these companies aren't available near me. So I don't know quite as much about them as I do from the US companies. When I was looking at, so typically when I consult with people, I always ask them about previous diets because sometimes, especially with this, we have a dog that has allergies potentially or has allergic symptoms, but we don't really know, is this a food-based allergic symptom or is it an environmentally based allergic symptom? We want to know what they've been on before and then what they've changed to. And if there's been any change in clinical signs, then we may be able to attribute that potentially to diet. Now, in this case, we were on a chicken-based raw food. The food itself, when I was researching it, I was trying to figure out who formulated the food, if the food was complete and balanced. I saw wording saying that the raw food was complete, not complete and balanced. Complete if they're formulated to FedAF. It could be a complete and balanced diet, but there wasn't mention of that I could find. I don't know if I just didn't look at the right part of the website or not. I know that the person that formulated it was a butcher, and so I don't know if they took additional classes in formulation or not. I didn't see any certifications. I didn't see any additional kind of qualifications on them. I don't know if they consulted with someone to double check their formulation, but because it's vague there, I don't know if the previous diet that was chicken-based actually had all the nutrients that this dog needs. So I flagged that as potentially unbalanced, but I don't know. The new Eura grain-free diet looks like they have a more robust team that's formulating the diet. So potentially a better formulated diet. It is using a novel protein, the insect-based protein. I think it was black soldier fly larva is what they're using, which it's a little bit lower in chitin, which is called a fiber, but it's like the exoskeleton of the insect. It's lower in that than like a cricket. Like cricket-based proteins have a high amount of chitin, whereas black soldier fly larvae have a lower amount in chitin within the diet. And I don't know if I'm saying that.
I do not know that at all. I'm so not familiar with insect-based diets at all.
I find them fascinating.
They are very fascinating.
They're really cool. It offers an additional protein source for dogs that really need a novel protein diet.
Yes.
And it sounds like when the owner was describing kind of the transition, that the dog was doing much better on the Eura than it had been doing on this raw food.
Yeah.
Before. But the thing is, with the Eura, she's also feeding a chicken pate. So the protein is not gone. We're still feeding chicken-based protein, and we've had an improvement in clinical signs. So for me, when I'm looking at this, I'm like, this doesn't look like it's a chicken allergy where we're improving, where we really need an insect-based protein. And I think insect-based proteins are really cool. Like they're an additional option. We're getting more and more research on them as far as safety, but a lot of our research on insect-based proteins, unfortunately, I feel like it's still pretty small, like as far as like long-term feeding trials, long-term research.
Yeah. Oh, I could see that in the background. Charlie.
Sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, I was just looking. I think he's trying to decide if he's going to get up onto his cot or not.
Charlie.
But anyway, so the research around insect-based proteins, I feel is still pretty preliminary. Like we're getting more and more out there. We've established basic safety, but we haven't established what I'd call long-term safety yet. Most of the feeding trials are only a couple months long.
Yes.
So
okay.
With that information, typically what I recommend for people is if you need like a novel protein, like truly need one, then I would potentially think about an insect-based protein. I think they're really cool. But if you don't truly need an insect-based protein, maybe we look at other protein options.
Yes.
So I'm just so distracted. What's that?
Does he need a wee wee?
No, I think he might need help with going to bed. Do you want to?
Charlie, look. It's so
He might need something
cute.
else. I don't know. He's just
You are
gonna stare at me.
beautiful.
He might lay down and do something. I'm not sure. But anyways, let's see. I don't have long-term trials basically. So because I don't have long-term feeding trials and I don't know what long-term safety is, I typically say if we haven't tried other novel proteins first, we might want to, even though we maybe had some response of this. And it seems like we have a partial response. Now and we didn't actually eliminate chicken. So we didn't even do a true food trial.
Yes.
Which means improvement could be due to just seasonality. Like we're seeing less symptoms just because the season has changed. I know you guys have true seasons. I don't have seasons where I live. They're a joke.
We
In Southern California, it goes from hot to less hot. I never get rid of plants at all, or plants are year round. But it could be just seasonality is the reason why the symptoms have improved if this has been like a short-term thing. So my general recommendation would be, if we want to do a food trial, to do a true food trial and make sure we're using a full novel protein, not just part of a novel protein. Because right now we haven't even gotten the food trial done to know if we potentially have any type of food-based allergy. If you want help with that, I would probably go to, if they have access to a board certified dermatologist,
Yes.
awesome. That's probably the best place to do a food trial. But at the very least, going back to your vet and being like, hey, my dog's really itchy. Can we do a novel protein trial? And they'll probably recommend a couple of different options. You can do a novel protein trial with a hydrolyzed diet. So hydrolyzed diets are diets that basically they have like protein molecules are big things.
Yes.
And what they do for hydrolyzed diets is they use hydrolysis to break the protein molecule into smaller pieces. And then those smaller pieces can't actually be recognized by the immune system. So they pass without causing flares.
Yes.
So they can be a really good option for a food trial, especially if we have a really long list of things that are potential allergens. If she had done a lot of rotation in the past, it doesn't sound like she's done that though.
No.
So she might not need to do a hydrolyzed diet for a food trial. Though she could. You could do just a novel protein diet instead. You could do like a venison-based diet or a rabbit-based diet, or like, even since you've done chicken previously, like your novel protein could be beef or pork. Like it doesn't have to be something like super crazy.
Yes.
And basically for a food allergy, how it works is your dog has to have been exposed to the protein previously in order to have a reaction. So if your dog has never had beef, the clinical signs you're seeing are not from beef. They're from something they're already eating. I think the challenge that she will probably have as someone that also has small children is that her child is giving her dog treats unintentionally. So I don't know how many times my kids gave my dog like,
right?
or something under
I
the
just want to be
table.
nice.
Yeah. So if that's the case, what you might need to do, and I don't know how old her child is and if they have established meal times or if it's like the snacky period where their kid like literally is just pulling out snacks all day long. And I don't know if they're in daycare or not, or I guess I don't know how
like nursery. Yeah.
nurse. I was like, I think they're different terms in the UK.
Everything is different between English and American.
Yeah, childcare is different. But depending on how much they are at home versus not, like I know you can do the thing where you have your dog, you get a pet safe enrichment item. So say their diet for the novel protein trial, you put that on, you could get like a stainless steel muffin tin. And you can put little bits of the diet into each of the little holes and then put them in a different room with the door closed to eat that while you guys are eating dinner. And then once dinner's cleaned up, you come get your dog, so that they're eating something that they find mentally enriching while you're at the other table.
Yes.
I know that's sometimes mentally pretty hard for people if they're used to giving their dog treats.
Yeah.
But you have to understand that they're going to really enjoy the enrichment once they get going on it and understand what it is. But finding an enrichment item, usually I recommend for a feeding trail, something that is like stainless steel, or probably not glass because you have a toddler. And I don't know if your dog is a pawing dog, but stainless steel is nice. You can get also like lunch trays.
Yes.
And soak the kibble that you're using and then mash it into the lunch trays. And then you can use almost like a lick mat. But the challenge is that with a feeding trail, if any of your bowls are porous, so if you're using like ceramic bowls or plastic bowls, those are porous and you'll have to use something else during the feeding trial period to do a true feeding trial. And then any medications, treats that are flavored are usually removed during at least the first part of the feeding trial and then maybe challenged afterwards.
And is it 6 weeks for the feeding trial? Normally?
So typically for skin issues, a minimum is usually around 8 weeks.
Yes.
Usually we go to 12. If we're doing, food allergies can have different clinical signs. Some food allergies, you have GI clinical signs. The GI clinical signs when we're doing a food trial for, typically those feeding trials are really short, like 2 weeks long. Versus for skin takes time to repair. So to know if a diet's working, it's usually 8 weeks after the transition.
Yeah. Okay.
Is when you're the first time where you're reevaluating. And then obviously you have seasonal changes, which can affect itchiness, which is why you probably want a vet on board because they may need to adjust your medication. I know sometimes they'll start the dog where they're on medication. And then once they get to the 6 week mark, they'll taper off medication to see if they're doing well, to see if the
Well,
medication can be removed. It just depends on the case. So working with your vet on that would be a good idea, but you may be able to you could do a true feeding trial if nothing happens, which it can like Ranger back here. Ranger has environmental allergies.
Yeah.
So when we did his feeding trial, literally nothing happened.
And that's great,
So
isn't it? You're like, with the hard work for 8 weeks, and but at least he told, like, at least you knew then that was what there was in the food, and I think that's good as well. Outcome.
So that's one part of it, is like knowing, okay, it's not food. Which when I had kids, that's why I said kids are a big factor for doing a food trial. When I had kids and they were throwing food everywhere, I was like, thank goodness my dog doesn't have a food allergy. This would be like horrible,
Nightmare.
But at the time, I was like, oh, that would have been so easy to manage if he just had a food allergy.
Yeah.
But so when you know that's environmental, then you can do management strategies, and since it's like in the environment, right? Bathing, you can do wipe downs, you can, if you work with a boarded dermatologist, you can do something called immunotherapy, especially if you have pet insurance. I know in the US, pet insurance will cover immunotherapy, and immunotherapy like reduces clinical signs in dogs with allergies in like 50 to 80% of cases. Like it works really well. And it basically retrains the immune system not to overreact to the environment. So it's really cool. So if you
is that the one
where
they get injected with
Yeah, so that there's testing. So to start, they'll usually do, depending on the dermatologist and the dog, they'll take blood and then they'll usually shave a spot on their side and make a grid. And then they do little injections of allergens on that grid to see what they're allergic to. And then they also send out blood, and then they do testing to see what that comes back as allergic to. Then they create a customized serum. Now, from my understanding, there is an oral form and an injectable form.
Wow. Okay.
So I don't know if the increments are the same between the two, but it used to be that you only had the injectable form, and then you start more frequently. It'll be like twice daily for the first month, and then you go to once daily, then every other day, like you taper off. I don't know if the frequency for the oral is any different. I've never had someone do the oral before, but apparently it is available at some dermatologists now. So if needles aren't a thing,
so interesting. That's so much more advanced, isn't it, compared to, because normally the dog would most likely need a GA to be able to like do that, right? To where they shave a little bit, start injecting things. It's very similar. I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and there was this gut microbiome expert, and she was talking about fecal transplants to restore the that for me, it's amazing, like how far advanced we are. And I don't know the efficacy of it yet. They still don't know. She was very clear. She said, look, this is not, we are still testing. We're still at the beginning of all of this. It was so cool to see. So what they did, they take a good gut microbiome of a super healthy dog. And then a dog that doesn't have one, they can take oral tablets basically to try and restore the gut microbiome, which is
so they used to have to do it. The new one is taking tablets. The old version of that was actually having a healthy dog in clinic, and you would actually have to take a stool sample from them and spin it down and create it, and then you give them basically an enema of it.
Wow.
So that's like the old school version. The new school version is actually an oral tablet, which I remember when that first started coming out, everyone was like, ooh, that's way better than what we've been doing, because it works really well for dogs that have horrible gut dysbiosis.
Yes.
And I know that there was a research study that looked at using fecal transplants for dogs with parvo, because they have really bad dysbiosis during treatment. And I think that study showed that it was pretty effective with helping with these stools for afterwards. So I thought that was pretty cool. But it is still more in the preliminary phase as far as the oral tablet version.
Yeah.
But I've heard good things, like from vets that I've talked to that have tried it. They've had pretty good results with the oral tablet, and it definitely beats like the traditional way of doing it. So,
yeah.
So I think that was basically everything for, let me see.
The Jack Russell.
For Louis, other than, I think the only other thing I wanted to mention with the Jack Russell was that I want you to, I know you're using a lot of, I think the pate for treats, the JR chicken pate. If you do a food trial, you may need to soak the kibble, or you may need to use a canned food that's similar to what your dry food is during that trial period. I also couldn't find any information on the JR chicken pate if it is actually a complete and balanced diet. That may be something where, again, with any diet, it's really good to contact the pet food company. You want to know, is this diet complete and balanced for to FedAF FedAF or AAFCO? Is the diet formulated by someone that is highly qualified or a team of highly qualified individuals? What is the quality control procedures of that diet? Those are things that like you should, if it's not easily stated on the website, which I didn't see any of that on
No.
JR Chicken Pate, you probably want to reach out to that company and ask them. In my opinion, it's better to ask the company those questions when, a recall is not happening or
Yes.
when they're not having issues or you're not having issues than to have to try to figure out how to contact them. Say your dog is having like horrible loose stools and you haven't changed anything. That is the time that you don't want to have to contact them to know if they're going to respond. You want to know
Yes.
beforehand that they're going to respond and give you information.
Absolutely.
And if
Yes.
they're not going to, maybe that's not the ideal option for you.
Yes, of course. Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. That's really good. That's really good suggestion. Amazing. I'm sure people are absolutely going to love this feedback, by the way. So last dog is a Cockapoo, 4 years old. He's 13 kilograms currently. His body condition is slightly overweight. So target is a kilo less, 12 kilograms. Activity moderate. So he walks and play, she walks and play, but doesn't have too much energy. Health wise, she's on AAFCO for allergies. Her diet is 130 grams of pucha mat, health and digestion kibble, heavily reliant on toppers, mainly cheese, corn and corned beef to get her to eat meals. She's very picky, often skips meals or eats at inconsistent times of the day. Currently, she's not on any supplements. First poo of the day is normal. Second and third are again soft, and it takes time. It takes a little bit of time to pass. So what she's essentially said is she will be at the park and she will be squatting for, 2 minutes as opposed to a normal dog doing it for a few seconds. And the owner's concern are mainly, she's very stressed about the picky eating, not sure if she's overfeeding or underfeeding due to the different eating patterns that she has. And then she's worried that the food isn't balanced, as obviously she's having to add so many toppers, and the diet is actually what's causing all these digestive issues.
Yeah. So I think that all of her concerns are really valid with what's going on as far as, so I know that when I was looking at this, it seemed like we'd gotten into the trap of the fact that we're having to top a diet with like fresh foods in order to get our dog to eat, and that progressively these fresh foods potentially have become more fatty and more like to appeal to the dog. Corned beef is pretty high fat as far as the meat is concerned. If it's a full fat cheese, that's also really calorie dense. Both of those are like 100 calories an ounce.
Yeah.
So if she's scooping an ounce of that in the morning, an ounce of that at night, or I guess if you guys are in grams, you'd be looking at 28 grams in the morning, 28 grams at night as far as the topper of that, and then you're giving the diet, then yeah, the diet is not complete and balanced. Right now, we're feeding just above resting energy requirements of our balanced diet. Which is really low, and we're slightly overweight. So yes, I think the toppers are probably doing it for you where they're causing it, but it also seems like the not eating, you have to give the toppers or your dog just doesn't eat. Now, there's a couple of things that could be happening because and it's hard to say which one is going on. And I guess I can go into that kind of part first, but we are accidentally overfeeding basically calories. And if we are accidentally overfeeding calories and there is nothing that's an underlying condition, then the thing that I usually recommend is that instead of topping with things that are unbalanced, what I want us to do is I want us to top with things that are balanced. So typically, basically what this would look like is you're going to use a diet designed for low calorie feeding. And honestly, I don't know that many diets within the UK. So like the example in my head that came up first was like the Farmina Mini Light diet. So that one is basically a high protein, low fat, pretty high fiber kibble that is lower in caloric density. And then what I would do is I'd pair that with the Farmina weight control can, which is a little bit higher in fat and lower in carbohydrates and fiber, but it'd probably be a lot tastier. I'm going to put those together, and basically that's going to create a low calorie diet that hopefully is highly palatable. Really canned food, we can do it 50-50 as far as calories are concerned and still offer 30 calories in treats, and then we can have a complete and balanced diet. And that's if it's just you're overfeeding food, and because we're overfeeding, that is causing us to not want to eat as much, and we're fluctuating. Basically, you're offering on a regular basis 700 calories, and your dog's caloric needs are actually only 450. So they'll eat a lot one day and then not really eat anything the other day, and then you're having to consistently do toppers. Instead, I want to average the amount offered down, but make the whole diet highly palatable instead of just the toppers highly palatable.
Yes, that's
So
a good.
that's where I would redistribute if it's just pickiness. The one thing I do want to say is that it might not just be pickiness. It's possible that this could be nausea. And I think a lot of people that have dogs that have pickiness where they're like, I offer it and literally they don't eat for days. That is weird. I want to express how odd it is to offer a kibble for 3 days straight or 2 days straight, and you keep offering it and they don't eat anything. To me, if you're starving, if you're hungry, you will eat. You don't just
Yeah.
not eat.
Yeah.
The fact that we're not eating means that there's a problem, right? I really don't like eating raw carrots, but if I'm starving and it's the only option, I will eat raw carrots. I really don't like them. They're not my favorite.
Yeah.
Like, I will still eat them if I'm really hungry and there's nothing else in my fridge.
Yeah.
So if your dog is not eating something and it's the only option that's offered and you don't top it, which it sounded like when I know we went back to question and it sounded like she had done that, like she'd offered food and the dog just literally refused.
Walks
There
away.
could be an underlying condition that's causing them to inconsistently refuse food whenever they're a little bit nauseous. And just basically the highly palatable nature of these toppers is overpowering the nausea to where they will still eat and then they end up with loose stools. Now,
Yeah.
if this is the case, then it's okay. Now we need to go back to the vet. Maybe we need to look at GI conditions or we need to look at their teeth. Like, are their teeth where eating a hard kibble is really hard, so they don't really want to eat it that much? We need to look at other things going on. So if it is a GI issue, typically the 4 categories of diets that we would trial is going to be highly digestible, low fat, novel protein, and high fiber. The vet would make the decision of which of those would be potentially most appropriate to trial first. They may recommend adding on like a probiotic a little bit. It really depends. And they also might do additional testing first, like a CBC chem. They might do like a GI panel. They might do an ultrasound. Depends on what they see on exam and what's going on. The other thing that could be going on, and it does happen more common than I feel like most people want to admit, is that your dog has trained you to top their food.
Yeah. I see that all the time in my
This is
boarding
probably
business.
the most frustrating. Out of all 3 of these, this is the most frustrating category to deal with
The hardest to train.
because you have to retrain your dog. And it's hard. It's so hard because you as a person have to work through your guilt of the refusal of food. And then you have to I usually refer these people to a behavioralist because they have to teach their dog to eat again regular food.
Yeah.
And there is actually, I know that one of my clients a while ago actually went to a talk by a behavioralist that focused on training dogs basically to eat if they were picky. And
Love
it
it.
worked on basically finding something that was highly palatable and using it as treats that was complete imbalance and associating it with other things they enjoyed doing. So say if they enjoyed playing like a find it game, you would have to incorporate that find it game into the food to get them to eat. And then you'd reward them with attention rather than food for eating.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a
But
great way, actually. Because you turn it into a fun game. Because I went in my boarding business when I have this pig, and it's normally the poodle. Poodles
yeah.
are my worst. Oh my good, like I cannot tell you, like they are so bad, all of them. And that's what I have to do. I turn into a game. So I take a bowl, move the food into the other bowl, microwave it for 10 seconds, start chopping, pretending I'm chopping stuff, put it back, and then eventually the food is gone. But you turn into a game. They're like, oh, you need to make it want it, basically, make them want it. And then eventually works.
I had a client that had always fed his dog from the table.
Yeah.
Always fed it. And it would not eat any kibble. He only would eat. I was like, what I want you to do is we're going to make a complete and balanced diet. You are going to make a dog plate and a human plate. You're going to have a dog fork and a human fork. And literally you are going to feed your dog's food from the table. And he'd just take a piece and feed it to his dog from the table. It worked great. But that was a complete behavioral issue.
Yeah, it shows, doesn't it?
It was just so used to that's where we get the food. And eventually we actually adjusted because he didn't want to cook long term. We adjusted the proportions of cooked to pre-made food. And eventually he actually went on to a combo diet.
Yes.
But it's a behavioral thing. And if it's a behavioral thing, then you need a trainer to help you with that. I don't know which situation they're dealing with, if it's just overfeeding of treats and if this happens with poodles a lot. Poodles actually I call them very in touch with their hunger and fullness cues. They know when they're hungry and they're like, no, I'm full. But what happens is they eat less than the bag recommends because they also aren't usually highly active generally as a breed. I found that they aren't. They don't have crazy caloric needs.
No.
So what happens is the client will put out the food, then the poodle's, I'm not hungry right now.
Yeah.
And so they just walk away and they're like, oh my God, they're not eating. How could they not eat?
You just
And so then
panic
they pick it
naturally.
up and they put food on top, like a topper,
Yeah.
right? Some
Yeah.
chicken. They put it down and the poodle's, you know what? I'm not really that hungry, but I'll eat the really good stuff. So they
Yes.
just eat the topper and they leave
They're just a
everything else.
very smart breed, right? They're just very smart because
It's
they
just
can play. It's like collies, but then collies are more like, they're
they're
like,
really intelligent and they're just like, oh no, and then maybe by the end of the day, if you just offer it again, they're like, oh, by now I'm actually fairly hungry. So I guess I'll eat. But like they're not automatically first thing in the morning very hungry. So I think that also keeping in mind that like our dogs are individuals and
yes.
not all dogs enjoy eating at meat
Yeah.
like a direct meal time. And
Yes.
especially since I think when we talked to this owner, she said that we were free fed before.
Yes. Yes.
And that happens quite often with dogs that are free fed is since they always had access to food, they don't understand the urgency of eating on a time.
Yes.
So
Yes.
transitioning to not doing
Yeah.
that makes it
Yeah.
so that it's more apparent. I do think that free feeding is hard because you can't track calories. So you don't
Yes.
actually know the nutrient density you
Yeah.
need. Dogs tend to, some breeds will tend to overeat as well.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can't restrict calories, but you can do an alternative free feeding where you portion the food in the morning into the bowl and then you just leave it out. This is
Yes.
where like kibble shines because you could just portion the daily amount into the bowl
Yeah.
and just leave it all day long.
Yes.
And they can just graze on it and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And that's fine. And for people that have dogs like this, what I'll usually recommend is you weigh the food going in, then I want you to weigh the food coming when you put it like the weigh the food at the end of the day as well. Like
Yes.
before you put in the new food. And it's
Yes.
going to be dumped each day because we don't want just stale food sitting out there.
Yes.
So that you can
Absolutely.
track how much your dog is eating, but
Yes.
you're offering a consistent amount. But I have a feeling if we want to know if it's pickiness or not, decreasing calories, I don't know how many dogs where I just offer the entire diet is complete and balanced, but I reduce the calories.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the dog is eating really consistently.
Yes.
So I actually just had a
100%.
client that had that happen. And they're like, he's not picky at all anymore. I was like, yeah, we reduced the calories by 100. And then I offered it as all complete and balanced diet.
Yeah.
And now he's losing weight and he's eating consistently.
Wow.
So,
It goes to show, doesn't it? Because another
Yeah.
thing is that she eats, I think she mentioned she eats like sometimes at 1 a.m. And I'm like, if you try and offering her food at 10 a.m., if she ate 1 a.m, it's really, they're just not hungry. And some dogs do better on a once a day, being fed once a day. I'm not like a big advocate of, oh, you have to feed this number of times, things like that. But the reality of it is, if your dog is not hungry and they just want their food once a day and that what works for them, then it's fine. My dog would murder me if I do that because he's like 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. He's like a bark to tell me like it's dinner time. But it's just every dog is different. It's as people. There are some people, I don't have breakfast. I'm not hungry in the morning, but I could not have a pudding at the end of, or a dessert at the end of the night, like Greek yogurt with something. So, but everyone is different. Dogs are the same. And that's what we need to learn, isn't it?
Exactly. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that I know she's giving treats each day. I tried really hard and I hate treat packaging. It's so annoying. Some treat brands will actually give you like the calories per treat.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of the treats that she's using gives you calories per keg. So like you need to weigh out how much your treat is in order to figure out how many calories it is. Like treats can range. Like some calories, like treats are only 1 calorie. Some treats are like 50 calories each.
How
So
big
it's
they are and things like that. Yeah.
that she could be like her dog might be over consuming treats. Like we're not a super big dog. Like 13 kegs are about 30 pounds ish.
Yeah.
That's not a really big dog.
No.
And our total calories for consuming, if we're at our area, is like 450 calories.
Yes.
If those
It doesn't take that
5
much.
calorie treats, if I do like simple math, right? 5 calorie treats 5 times a day, that's 25 calories on top of the 200 calories for toppers.
Yes.
If we just ate that, like that's 50% of our calories. So we wouldn't really be eating that much kibble at all.
100%. It's just that she's not a foodie. Right. My dog would eat that and
My dog
more because he loves food.
And then he'd be morbidly obese.
Yes, Cavis tend to be, right? I have to watch every single movie that has with that food because you cannot take your eyes off him. He can go from 10 kilos to 11 super easily, just like you said, with treats because he just loves it so much.
Exactly.
And yeah. This is amazing, by the way. I have learned in the last 2 hours so much. And I seem to think I am quite experienced. I've been in the industry now for like 5 years, but I have learned so much from you. Quick question for you, Nikki, is if someone or anyone that is listening to this episode wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do it?
Probably by email. So my email is nikki@nikkipetnutrition.com. And then you can just email me. Typically with clients, I'll send you like a whole bunch of forms to fill out. And then you fill out a whole bunch of forms, and then I get back to you as far as like what our options are, if they want to go on the phone or like Google Meet or something like that, or if it's just going to be over email. As far as consultations. But yeah, for dogs that have medical conditions, I do require a veterinarian referral. I know that some people struggle with that, but it's required for me.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And generally, like, obviously, like you've done this 4 days evaluation with me. I just wanted to say like how quickly I sent you this thing, I think last Friday, and within a day, like you're just so detailed and your reviews are just incredible. I don't know. And you called a mini consultation, didn't you? So it didn't look like.
Because I figured that I couldn't go in. Like I said, I don't know all the pet food brands in the UK super. So usually if people are based in the US, I know the companies a little bit more as far as like quality control and formulation expertise and stuff like that. And then obviously if I don't know a brand, sometimes I'll be like, hey, can we hold up on the consultation? I'm going to contact this brand and get that information for you. Like I didn't go through all these brands and contact them to get information about them. So it was more like surf in the sense of like just looking at macros and the dog. For email consultations, typically I try to get back to people within 48 hours, at least to give them the first like little bit of information. And then my email consults go over 2 weeks. So basically people go back and forth emailing me for 2 weeks with any questions. And the idea is at the end of 2 weeks, they're confident with the meal plan and we have a revised meal plan if we need to revise things. So but I also offer phone consultations as well, or like ones over Google Meet. So it just depends on the person's preference and their budget to what they want to do.
Amazing. And I will put a link in the show notes of your website, your email, your Instagram profile, so everyone who watches they can contact you really easily. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. You have been generally, I absolutely loved today's conversation. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you for watching. If you found this episode helpful, follow us on Instagram. And if you want first access to DAFY, join our waitlist now. The links are in the show notes.